Today I'll be testing several M2 cryogenically treated wood turning tools from Findbuytool during a real bowl turning project. Findbuytool is a woodworking company focused on producing professional woodworking and wood turning tools without the extremely high pricing that often comes with premium branding. What interested me most about these tools was the combination of M2 steel and cryogenic treatment, something usually found on much more premium wood turning tools. For this project, I selected tools that I would realistically use in my workshop on a regular basis. A 16mm bowl gouge for rough shaping and hollowing, a spindle gouge for finer detail work, a half-round scraper for bowl finishing cuts and bowl bottom cleanup, and a round nose scraper which I later reshape into a custom point scraper profile that I personally like using for final finishing cuts. Most of my current tools are from brands like Record Power, Crown and Gurtul, so this gives me a very good reference point while testing these new Findbuytool tools. But before sharpening anything or making modifications, I first wanted to test the tools exactly as they arrived out of the box. Before starting the real turning process, I first wanted to test the 16mm Findbuytool bowl gouge exactly as it arrived from the factory. Right away I could already see that the edge wasn't sharpened quite the way I personally prefer for bowl turning. And honestly, that's not unusual. Most wood turners eventually adjust their tools to fit their own sharpening style, cutting angles, and workflow anyway. So first, I wanted to see how the tool performs directly out of the package before changing anything. The tool was definitely usable, but after the first cuts, it became very clear that the edge had much more potential with proper sharpening. So before continuing, I decided to sharpen the bowl gouge the same way I normally prepare my own bowl gouges in the workshop. For this one, I used the double bevel grind, which is a sharpening style I personally like using for bowl work because it gives me better control during both heavier roughing cuts and lighter finishing passes. I was also curious to see how the M2 steel behaves during sharpening compared to some of the tools I already use regularly. And immediately after sharpening, the difference became very obvious. The tool suddenly felt much cleaner, smoother, and far more predictable on the cut. The shavings became more consistent, the surface quality improved noticeably, and the overall cutting experience felt much more natural. This is also a very good reminder of how important proper sharpening really is in wood turning. Even a very good steel can feel average with the wrong edge geometry. But once properly sharpened, the tool completely changes character. One thing that also makes these Findbuytool tools interesting is their business model. Unlike many traditional premium brands, Findbuytool mainly sells directly from the factory where the tools are produced without multiple distributors and retail layers, adding additional margins along the way. And that's probably one of the main reasons why tools like these can stay much more affordable while still using cryogenic treated M2 high-speed steel that is usually found on more premium wood turning tools. Companies like Crown have built a very strong reputation over many years, and their tools are extremely popular among wood turners for good reason. But what Findbuytool seems to focus on is putting more of the cost into the actual steel manufacturing and production instead of premium branding and multiple reseller markups. The cryogenic treated M2 high-speed steel is designed for good wear resistance, durability, and long-lasting edge retention during real wood turning work. And combined with cryogenic treatment, the steel structure becomes more refined and stable, which can help the edge stay consistent longer during real turning work. Of course, the real test is always on the lathe. So after sharpening the tool properly, I wanted to see how it actually performs during real bowl turning. After testing the bowl gouge, it was time to move on to the 16mm Findbuytool spindle gouge. And just like before, I first wanted to test it exactly as it arrived from the factory before changing the edge geometry. The factory sharpening was definitely usable, but once again I could already feel that the tool would probably perform much better after sharpening it to match my own turning style and preferences. So, first, I spent a little time using the original factory edge to get a real first impression of how the tool behaves directly out of the box. The spindle gouge felt stable and controlled during lighter cuts, especially while refining smaller details and transitions on the bowl. But after sharpening the tool myself, the difference became noticeable very quickly. The cuts immediately started feeling cleaner and smoother. The tool became more predictable during finer movements, and it simply felt much more natural in use. This is also something I personally find very important with wood turning tools. Not only the steel itself, but also how well the tool responds to sharpening and how comfortably it can be adapted to your own workflow. And so far, the M2 steel from Findbuytool seems to respond very nicely to sharpening while still keeping a strong cutting edge during use. Next, I moved on to the 1-inch Findbuytool round nose scraper. Before changing anything, I first wanted to show how the tool looks directly out of the package and test the original factory profile on the bowl. The standard round nose profile is very useful for general scraping work and surface cleanup, but for my own workflow, I usually prefer a much more pointed scraper shape for fine finishing cuts. So, before sharpening, I marked out the profile that I wanted to create on the tool and also compared it with one of my own custom point scrapers that I already use regularly in the workshop. This type of point scraper profile has become one of my favorite tools for final surface refinement because it allows me to work comfortably in both directions while maintaining very controlled and delicate cuts. It's especially useful for removing the last remaining tool marks from bowl gouges before sanding, particularly on curved surfaces and difficult grain where larger scrapers can sometimes feel too aggressive. Before reshaping the scraper, I also wanted to test the original factory profile directly on the bowl to see how it behaves out of the box. The scraper worked well immediately, but once again, I could already feel that the tool had much more potential once modified to match my own preferred geometry. So after testing the original profile, I reshaped the scraper into my custom point scraper design and sharpened it the way I normally prepare these tools in my workshop. And honestly, the difference became obvious almost immediately. The scraper suddenly felt much more precise and controlled during lighter finishing cuts. It also became much easier to remove the remaining bowl gouge tool marks cleanly before sanding. This is exactly the type of work where scraper geometry and edge quality make a huge difference. A poorly sharpened scraper usually starts tearing the grain very quickly, but with the sharper point profile and freshly sharpened M2 edge, the cuts became much cleaner and more predictable. After finishing the outside of the bowl, it was time to move on to the bottom area using the Findbuytool 1.5-inch half-round scraper. This scraper is made from triple tempered M2 high-speed steel and also goes through cryogenic treatment, which is designed to improve edge stability and long-term wear resistance during turning. The scraper itself feels very solid in the hand, especially because of the thicker blade profile and the longer hardwood handle. Before starting the final cuts on the bowl bottom, I also wanted to show another scraper that I made for myself in the workshop. Unlike a traditional fully rounded scraper profile, this one has a flatter section across the top before transitioning into the curved sides. I designed this profile specifically for bowl work because it helps create much smoother and more controlled flowing lines, especially around the bowl bottom where the transition needs to stay visually clean and balanced. And since I really like how this geometry performs during finishing cuts, I decided to reshape the Findbuytool scraper into a similar profile as well. So before continuing the turning process, I modified and sharpened the scraper to match the shape that I normally prefer for this kind of work. This becomes very important during finishing cuts because even small uneven areas around the bottom can completely change how smooth the final shape looks. You'll see this much better later once I begin finishing the inside of the bowl. After reshaping the scraper, the tool immediately started feeling more natural for the type of cuts I personally like using during bowl work. The wider scraper profile combined with the flatter center section helped create very smooth flowing cuts while refining the bowl bottom and preparing the area for the logo insert. And one thing I noticed quite quickly was how long the edge continued cutting cleanly before needing additional sharpening. This is exactly the type of work where edge quality matters a lot because cleaner finishing cuts usually mean less sanding and a much cleaner final surface overall. After finishing the bottom and preparing the logo area, it was finally time to reverse the bowl and begin working on the inside. I first used the Findbuytool Spindle Gouge to clean and level the rim area before starting the hollowing process. After that, I switched back to the 16mm Findbuytool Bowl Gouge for the main interior shaping. For the inside of the bowl, I mainly wanted to test how the Findbuytool Bowl Gouge and the modified round scraper work together during real bowl turning. Because this combination is actually very important in my normal workflow. The bowl gouge is mainly responsible for shaping the walls and creating the overall flowing form inside the bowl, while the scraper is used later for refining the bottom area and making the final finishing passes along the interior walls. This is also where tool control and edge quality become extremely important, especially inside deeper bowls, where even small catches or uneven cuts become much more noticeable. So far, the Findbuytool Bowl Gouge still feels very stable and predictable during longer interior cuts. The edge continues cutting cleanly even after quite a bit of turning already. And once I switched to the modified scraper for the bowl bottom and final finishing cuts, the combination of both tools started working together very naturally. The scraper allowed me to refine the bottom transition much more precisely while also removing the last remaining tool marks from the bowl gouge before sanding. And this scraper is actually especially well suited for this kind of bowl interior work because of the thicker steel profile. The additional thickness makes the tool feel much more stable during finishing cuts and helps reduce vibrations while working deeper inside the bowl. That stability becomes very important during lighter finishing passes where even small vibrations can affect the final surface quality. When using scrapers like this for final finishing cuts, tool presentation becomes very important. You always need to pay close attention to the angle between the scraper and the wood surface. The cutting angle should stay below 90 degrees because if the scraper becomes too aggressive or is presented too upright against the wood, it can very quickly lead to a heavy catch inside the bowl. Another important thing is that you should never force the scraper into the wood. For final finishing cuts, the scraper should almost feel like it's floating across the surface with only very light pressure. That's really the key to getting a very clean finish directly from the tool before sanding. And especially on burrwood and more difficult grain patterns, a sharp scraper with a light controlled cut can leave an incredibly smooth surface before sanding even begins. And this is exactly the type of real workshop use that I wanted to test with these tools from the beginning. With the turning finally complete, it was time for sanding and finishing. The outside of the bowl was already sanded earlier, so now I focused on finishing the inside and sanding everything up to 400 grit before applying the final finish. And honestly, this is always one of my favorite moments during a project, because this is where all the grain, figure and character of the wood finally starts coming to life. I'm also really curious what you think about these Findbuytool tools after seeing them used in a real bowl turning project. Would you personally test tools like these in your own workshop? And which of these tools interested you the most? If you'd like to check them out for yourself, I'll leave all the Findbuytool links down in the video description below. You can also take a look at their website, where they offer not only wood turning tools, but also many other woodworking and workshop products for both wood turners and woodworkers. And honestly, after testing these tools myself, I think many people will probably be surprised by the combination of quality, steel performance and pricing. I also really hope I'll have the opportunity to continue working with Findbuytool in the future and test more of their tools and products. And of course, a big thank you to Katrina Wu and the entire Findbuytool team for giving me the opportunity to test these tools in my workshop. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share the video with other wood turners and woodworking enthusiasts. That way, both professional wood turners and hobbyists can also discover tools that are not only affordable, but genuinely high quality as well. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next project.